For over 20 years, I've led a life of solitude and prayer. Now, for the first time in my life, I'm going to Europe. I'm going on a grand tour in search of some of the finest art treasures in the world. Everybody knows the splendors of Venice, but it's extraordinary to realize how so much human glory could be built upon mud and yet still survive for over 1,000 years. The Venetians have a proud history, and the gondolas are a reminder of the city's long love affair with the sea. Think of living here and going to work every day, inspired by some of the most exotic architecture in the world. The splendor of Venice is only rivaled by the wealth of its treasures. Doges and merchants were collectors on a prolific scale, and they decorated their buildings with works by the city's own artists, Titian, Tintoretto and Veronese, and that's to name but a few. But I want to begin with a little-known artist called Carpaccio. His painting of St. George and the Dragon has been here for over 500 years. St. George is one of those figures who's existed from prehistoric times. Our earliest legends speak about the hero who destroys the dragon of winter, and the hero who destroys the dragon of death. And in some form, there's always been a St. George. We've always needed this knight in armor who comes out to defeat the evil. And he's riding out with enormous strength on a great black horse to defeat the dragon. Now, Carpaccio's given us a wonderful dragon with his great kind of pie frill of energetic skin and his ferocious teeth. And we can see this dragon's been at work for some time, because look at all the bodies strewn around. And notice they're not just young females. St. George may be the hero who rescues the princess, but he's rescuing everybody, really. There were males and there were animal corpses there, too. And what St. George is showing us with such power is the long, straight lance going right through. Look how it's gone in the mouth and come out the other side. And perhaps we ought to just look at the people right in the distance, standing there so safely on their balustrades and outside their fortress, uninterested, looking on, when St. George alone battles with the dragon. Now, what the dragon is can be read in many ways. I think myself it's the dragon of our human pride, our own cruelty, the dragon within. And unless we battle with the dragon, unless we have a will and a determination, as sharp and as seriously wielded as St. George's, the dragon won't be slain. Our dragon, our responsibility. Venice is a timeless city. It has a strange atmospheric light that has attracted artists for centuries. Their greatest works are preserved at the Accademia. Here one can enter the world of the Renaissance, when the city was at the peak of its glory. But this gallery can boast a jewel so precious that it rivals the Mona Lisa itself. Giorgione's Tempest is a haunting mystery, and it's so delicate that we can't get too close. Giorgione died in his early 30s, yet he brought something completely new into art, a kind of wild, sweet, grave poetry, a sort of visual music that's never been equaled. And I think part of the magic has always been that nobody knows why they're enthralled by it. What is the subject? There have been endless explanations. A very early one was that here we have a landscape with a soldier and a gypsy. Now that doesn't explain the fascination of the picture. So then other scholars have said, aha, it's Mars and Venus. And others said, no, it's Adam and Eve. And others said, gracious, that's ridiculous. It's the active life, the man with his stick, and the contemplative life, which is perhaps true because if she tried to move, all her clothes would fall off, so she's certainly not an active woman. And others, looking at that strange gulf that separates the two, have said perhaps it's male and female, forever yearning towards one another, but forever apart. But for what it's worth, I've got my own explanation, and it's this. I think the center of the picture is the lightning flash. That we've got a darkened world, we see nothing, and suddenly lightning flashes and we do see. And what do we see? We see two isolated incidents of which we can make no sense whatever, and then the darkness closes down again. So the painting is really all about that sense of seeing and not seeing, never understanding what you see that we all know so painfully well, that gives this picture its wonderful poetry. Giorgione died tragically young, but his contemporary Titian lived to a great age. Very few artists get better and better as they get older, but Titian was one of them. This is probably his last painting. When Titian painted this, the plague was raging in Venice, so the fear of death was very prevalent, and it was very much part of Titian's own life. He was old, and he was afraid. And he's chosen for this very last picture, his sort of testimony to the world, the image of Christ dead being taken to the tomb. And next to him, so silent, so contained, is his mother. And then the two other figures. One is Mary Magdalene, wild with grief. He's painted her with the most enormous passion. She's angry about death. She's expressing something that Titian himself must have felt. That death is something we're not meant for. It's hateful. And on the other side, the old man. What we have here, clearly, is a self-portrait. Here is the old Titian, yearning with such intensity towards his God. He was a materialistic artist, Titian, made a lot of money and lived very well. We know nothing much about his inner life, but here at the end, he's telling us what matters to him. And you'll notice also how touchingly he shows himself not just on his knees, but almost on hands and knees like a child, begging that his family and himself would be spared from the plague. And then to make it more explicit, he's painted a tiny little square there at the bottom. And there are himself and his son Horatio, both pleading with a heavenly figure to be spared from the plague. And by the time this picture hung in the chapel, both of them had died from the plague. So it's a wonderful affirmation of faith and hope that doesn't seem to be answered, but is answered in the very beauty of what he's portrayed. Next week, my grand tour takes me to St. Petersburg.